Hey guys, glad to be here for this opening. Not gonna lie, this chapter or introduction for Crary's book, The Suspensions of Perception, it it's something. I don't know. I guess it kind of really took it out of me. It's complicated. It's long. It's kind of an arduous read, but yeah, it is what it is. I guess we'll get into it here real quick. Um, Basically, Curry's book Suspensions of Perception is based on the idea that everything we look at and pay attention to has a deeply historical character, kind of like the way that we pay attention to things and how we interact with it. It's not just like an individual type thing, but there's like a long history of like how people have paid attention to things and how people have interacted with it that has kind of led up to the way that we are interacting with it now. So it kind of goes into like whether it's computers, theater, like whatever you're paying attention to or whatever you're looking at. It doesn't matter what it is, but there's like a long history of like there's there's a history of like why we're behaving a certain way when interacting with a certain type of media. Um, there's a quote from him kind of towards the beginning. It says, "No doubt some will respond that I am comparing qualitatively different notions of attention. That, for example, a cultivated individual gazing on a great work of art could have little or nothing in common with a factory worker concentrating on the performance of some repetitive task." Um, but he, so that's basically what he's saying, that people will critique of him like that. That's will be the main critique of his book. But I guess his sort of point on what he's arguing is that that's not true. That um, even though people pay attention and interact with media in different ways and look at different things, that the actual like act of taking in some kind of media, or paying attention to something, like the example he used, like looking at art or like being a factory worker, that those two things are the actual like attention that you're putting into it, that they're linked. That is kind of like part of a long history of humans paying attention to things, that kind of leads up to the current day. Um, what he says is that he's essentially trying to map out a genealogy of where attention comes from, and to showcase like the role of like attention and how we pay attention to media and interact with it in a modernizing world. Um, so basically, he kind of goes through how attention is like this new kind of problem, and how the problems with attention arose, um, uh, relating to like changing notions of like visual perception. That there's different ways to pay attention to things, that there's different ways to look and take things in. Um, Another thing that he says is, thus, as I will argue, spectacular culture is not founded on the necessity of making a subject see, but rather on strategies in which individuals are isolated, separated, and inhabit time as disempowered. Likewise, counterforms of attention are neither exclusively nor essentially visual, but rather constituted as other temporalities in cognitive states, such as those in trance. Um, so yeah, again, it's kind of like it's a lot to take in. But basically, what I understood from this is saying that the way we pay attention to things and the way we're taking things in, it's not solely like visual. There's other things that go into it, and I guess part of what he's talking about is that as the world modernizes, the ways people pay attention to things will also change. That's kind of like what I think and understand is like the core of his of this chapter, this introduction, I guess, is that as media technologies advance, so too does our way of interacting with media change. Um, like the people in ancient Egypt, they're writing on papyrus and stuff like that. The way that they interact with media, the way they interact with, what they're reading and looking at, is going to be different from the way that I am interacting with it. thousands of years in the future. So that's basically kind of like what he's talking about, is that as the technology improves and as it goes on, then our way of interacting with it changes. I guess I want to close with this last quote from him before I get into the questions. He says, "I do not need to emphasize that this book is finally less about art than about a rethinking of reconstruction of perception in which art practices were significant but hardly paramount or exclusive components. Thus, I have tended to uproot these paintings from some of their familiar art historical frameworks and have bracketed any significant vertical explanations of artworks in terms of their relation to breaks and continuities along linear historical trajectory of movements and styles." I guess what I like is that he's trying to emphasize that it's not about the art. It's not about like these individual pieces that he kind of referenced in the book, in this introduction to it, but it's more about looking at it and kind of taking a step back and seeing how things change over time, as far as with our the way we take in media. So as for my questions for this, I want to ask, first one is, as explained by Crary, our attention to media changes as media technology changes. Media technology has changed a lot in the last 10-15 years. 15 years ago, the first iPhone wasn't even around. What ways have you seen media change in your lifetime? And how has the way people pay attention to media and interact with that media changed? So basically, like how have you seen media change in your lifetime, and how do we interact with it differently? And the second question is, why do you think the way we pay attention and interact with media changes so much? Do we make new technologies to keep up with how we change, or do we change because we make new technologies?